it turns out that all the theories about the ones that cervical cancers that didn't have HPV, no HPV, there are all kinds of theories and talks given about what they were. They had primary mutations and this or that, or they were somatic, this or that. And it was very interesting to watch those theories be strained as C shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, and A kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so virtually we found that 95+% of cervical cancers had HPV of one of these types. And in fact, that whole group didn't exist. So we have very few cervical cancers that don't have HPV of one of those types. And so we have a unique opportunity of a major cancer with almost a single necessary cause. So that's been really, really important. And hopefully we'll have something to do eventually with eradication or control of this cervical cancer. So each of these stages has a very characteristic age peak. Just like if you have warts on your feet, they used to happen when kids got into middle school and they had showers together, and then you get plantar warts, just type 1, HPV 1. Or little kids who get digital warts on fingers. That's HPV 2 and 26. There's characteristic timings. And for sexually transmitted HPV, there's a peak with onset of sexual activity that then declines in terms of incidence pretty much everywhere. Whereas then there's a second peak of those that don't lose it, and that's precancer. And then there's the eventual, the grow-out, slow, that plateaus or drops or goes up, that is cancer itself. And these three peaks, if you really believe in them, lead the way with this model, that this is the real model of things that are undeniable, the real transition states to logical prevention. Primary prevention, just stop people from getting HPV and you'll prevent cancer. Or get rid of all the precancers and you'll get rid of cancer. And if you believe those things, that has some pretty radical notions that we'll talk about later about how we should go about getting rid of cervical cancer as best as possible. Okay, so that's the natural history in a real rapid word. So this is Solon Rockwater, who was a dearly missed friend, who died a couple years ago, but was our companion for 25 years in these explorations, and was teaching us how to translate the very best and strongest associations into clinical tests. And so it's only rarely that a biomarker is strong enough, association is strong enough to merit for anything clinical. And this use in medicine or public health is the goal. We see the lab usually, or the clinician, that person who discovers A, as the accelerator, and epidemiology becomes very powered, and we're the steering wheel, even the brake, saying, hold on, this is not really strong enough to merit clinical use. But this is where epidemiology is the strongest. You have to come through us in order to talk about clinical utility. You need epidemiology. And most biomarkers fail as tests. So the default conclusion, if you really want to be grandiose, is that we are Gandalf on the bridge, and chaos of too many tests like the consumer are coming at us, and we're saying, you shall not test. So that's only going to be grandiose, and I think that we really are that effective. But basically, things have to come through population translational science to prove themselves. On the other hand, say something really does prove itself, like HPV testing. There's fears and inertia usually against changing a familiar clinical reference standard. So when you're trying to supplant a reference standard like CIN 2.3 for the FDA or for somebody else, and say that instead you have molecular measurements that are providing a test that's better than the reference standard, better even than the histologic standard, I say let whoever's without conflict of interest cast the first stone. What I mean by that is almost all committees exclude anyone who's worked for these tests from the committees. But clinicians and cytopathologists are considered physicians and therefore without conflict of interest. Or in fact, what we're basically saying is we need fewer gynecologists. We need less screening. We need less annual exams. And of course, the people most impacted is we need less cytopathology. And so I say everyone has a point of view and when good things are shifting. CN2 is an example of an endpoint that just needs to go away as being thought of as something. And that makes people very angry because they've spent their life trying to distinguish what's CIN2, what's CIN3, how bad is something. And it turns out that it's virtually impossible to make those distinctions. So a lot of what we've done is to question all biomarkers, including our own, and even if it's clinically established, make sure that they aren't thought of as disease. If someone has one of these, an abnormal pap smear is not disease, it's asymptomatic entirely. It's a predictor variable, and everything is a predictor variable. And the other thing that we're trying to change is we're trying to change the view of what makes a good test. It's been based in FDA clearance and every other venue as sensitivity, specificity, and derived variables such as ROC curve, area under the curve. But that may be yielding, and Solon would say rightfully so, to let the test correctly assign what should happen to the person. In other words, a good test correctly assigns what the action should be. And that's switching from the columns of the two-by-two tables to the rows, and to issues of absolute risk and counting up absolute risk numbers. And also, because we can't afford randomized clinical trials on everything, it's shifting to learning how to use big data, because you need really big data to look at a lot of these issues. So we're finding that we have to be very careful, because we have to, when we're doing these kind of trials, which are prospective trials, realize there aren't cancer. We're not following cancer. So CI3 is not a perfect surrogate endpoint. And we actually called one type carcinogenic, and it's not. And it takes 10 years to get rid of a test. And once one company uses that test, every other company wants to also have that type in their test. And my friend Phil and I have tried for years to get rid of the mistake I made at that IR committee by using CI3 prospectively as a surrogate endpoint incorrectly. 66 is a type that causes CI3 but not invasive cancer. And yet it's in every test kit, and even the ones that are being planned now will have it. And hundreds of thousands of women will be told they have a carcinogenic HPV, and they don't. This thing just came on. What does that mean? I don't know. Okay. So we now have all these tests. We've been developing just an embarrassment of riches of tests. In psychology, with HPV testing, we have using them both. We have low resource settings, high resource settings. We actually divide it more finely than that. And the problem is, it is so complicated that there's so many algorithms now and different people making algorithms that we can't keep up. So we are moving towards a different kind of dissemination of vaccination and HPV screening policy, and trying to wonder how far do we go with NIH scientists. We don't make guidelines. Clinical groups make guidelines. We talk about risk. And so we made the decision that we provide the risk estimates. Other groups provide the decision about what they mean, because they're often value judgments. So the principle that a lot of us, from us CAT-T a lot, have promulgated is equal management of equal risk. Doesn't matter what test you use, but a certain risk means a certain kind of what you should do. As you get increasingly severely at risk for cancer, there's more that you should do, and we're putting out tables like this instead of algorithms, that if your risk is really high, no matter how you got there, you do something like immediate colposcopy or even treatment, all the way down to discharge or whatever, depending on risk. And that involves massive risk calculations that we are undertaking with all the approved tests and all the combinations of approved tests and risk factors. And so we're moving from algorithms to apps. And young clinicians appear to be very comfortable with lookup apps. It's not a calculator. It's just an enormous risk matrix to be put into the electronic medical record or on a phone app and tell you, given this and this and this and this and this and this history and whatever, here's the recommended guideline, and then if you push a button, here's why, here's the risk, and then if you push another button, and here's the educational note. And that is very different than the old way, which was you get this test result, here's what you do. The test result sort of disappears, and the inside disappears, and a simplified recommendation comes out, which is considered a loss of locus control for clinicians, but the young ones seem to be used to it because there's so much information now that they realize they can't carry it all around in their head. So, we're just one voice at the table once we get to disseminating something like this. This is what I learned. We may think that we understand risk better than other people. We're just one voice. We need to do much better discussing risk, about the social aspects of risk tolerance, decisions about risk, and unless we do that, we'll be just scientific voices that are ignored. So we spend a lot of time trying to learn how to explain what we do better, but without crossing the line to pretending in any way that we're in charge of what the decisions are. One society may tolerate a certain trade-off between a few cancers and efficiency. Others can't afford to not. Whereas in the United States, we're very risk intolerant, and we may do a lot more in terms of interventions. I wanted to finish with a sense of the future and then try to get interactive. I'm much more comfortable talking to people than I am talking at people. So I welcome any discussion here or in the future by email or whatever. Say we really, really wanted to get rid of cervical cancer. We weren't just saying we wanted to or discussing it, but it was absolutely imperative to us, each one of us, to get rid of it. There are faster ways than what we are doing. And I want to give credit to Doug. Ted Lowy is a humble and interested scientist. And I really am incredibly grateful to Dr. Paul, my friend over the many, many years as he's in the HPV field. And I'm sure that he agrees that the real high impact is dropping incidence and mortality of cervical cancer, not just having the promise that we're about to do it, and advancing fundamental understanding of carcinogenesis. Those are what we really want to do. And what we want to do is do them as fast as possible. And so instead of this model where we prove that a vaccine works, which is currently a 2-dose HPV prophylactic vaccine that he helped invent, and give it before sex starts, and then wait all those years for cancer to be invariably prevented, and then screen people, which is very difficult, several times every 3 years or whatever. There's a theory coming, HPV Faster, popularized by Xavier Foss in Nature Reviews, in which we take faith in what Amy Kramer and Alan Zillesheim are doing right now, which is a trial of 1-dose vaccine. 1 dose of HPV vaccine lasts at least 5 to 7 years, it appears. And if you can consider this epidemic of HPV acquisition as any kind of epidemic, and if you do campaign, and if you just give it to everybody, 1 jab. Now I'm thinking back to all the time I spent in Africa, to Ibadan, to places that I sat and I couldn't even see across the street, where Julie and I were trying to walk across the street together and lost each other in the crowd. If you really want to go to a place where I was just in Addis Ababa, and I was looking around and saying, programs are going to be really hard to institute here. We need campaigns, something where you go around and do something once, And he's been successful in very poor places doing it. So, if we combine one dose vaccine and know that it'll last 5 to 7 years at least, we don't know how long it'll last. And that's the big trial that we're doing now to make sure we're right. But while that is being confirmed, and that's our division to do that trial with Gates, if we start planning for a screening of everybody that overlaps that HPV vaccination of the entire epidemic curve, we have something called HPV faster, which means you wipe out the first peak. The only people who don't get benefit are those who have active infection at that moment. Those people you pick up on an HPV screening test and you manage to treat them. If you can motivate donors, big donors, to get excited about the notion of doing something definitive about one of the worst cancers, one of the leading cancers in the world, the first leading cancer in lots of very poor places, it might re-energize the donor community if they think they can actually take something out rather than just institute a program that has to last decades. And that's the vision. The vision is to now get screening tests and HPV vaccination together, and then to start seriously taking a very, very common infection leading to a common cancer and eliminating it or at least controlling it severely. And that's sort of the hope of what we're working on now. And that starts vision, I believe. So, in the end, it's all about people. I want to thank Dr. Fahmy, who I've spent most of my career working under, for creating DCT. I sincerely believe that it's spawned things that he's taken no credit for, but have been incredibly, thousands and thousands of things that he's responsible for. Dr. Chanick, moving us in the direction of a whole world of genetics. And I want to really thank Peggy and Mark Green in particular, because it turns out that everything comes together. Mark was the first one with Peggy to realize that when I was coming as an epidemiologist talking about absolute risk or positive predictive value, that's the same as penetrance. And when they were studying rare family syndromic clinical genetics, that they were pointing out places in cascades, growth control pathways, which are really hard to find if you just go and you just try to find them as candidate or try to intuit them. They were pointing out entire pathways. Each family, each syndromic thing was now leading to an exomic kind of exploration of the whole spectrum of that mutation, that critical point and what it does and how it's modified and how there's people with lesser risk. It's the tip of the iceberg to discover critical points that lead to carcinogenesis. And I think we had a common vision that we wanted to study strong effects and we wanted to study things that had clinical impact. And they're understanding my desire to move to the clinical genetics branch, studying HPV. So some site visits and pleading to even convince people it made sense that they saw it immediately. And I want to especially thank them for enabling the second part of my career. Thanks very much. Thank you very much for that presentation. We have microphones in the aisles. I encourage you to step up and ask questions. We're available here for a bit to try to answer them. Or challenges. Sometimes I think we don't argue enough anymore because we're afraid of hurting each other's feelings. But in the grand British tradition, it's just good science to argue about things. It's not personal, so please. Yeah, as someone who did a residency in pathology back in the 80s, we had to go through the cytology passages and things and metamorphized into the Bethesda system. But I think what you're looking at isn't necessarily specific to the cervix. We have the same problem, as I learned further on, with thyroid cytology, whereas in particular, a follicular thyroid cancer is a very difficult entity to classify, which is also in need of perhaps the same type of treatment as you did here with the cervix and the peptic below. No? Yeah, the Bethesda system was a tremendous advance, but it was just on the way to recognizing that the real action was at the molecular level. And so even the Bethesda system eventually yields to a microscopic diagnosis of a molecular process. And the best way to look at a molecular process is molecularly. So I think more and more we just have to do the first thing, which is reproducibility. Get the best experts in the world who are absolutely certain they're the expert in their area and compare them. And when they disagree, they can't just say, well, whatever. That disagreement spawns discussion about the reality of any category. I think if you look at the whole field of cytology or cytopathology, you'll find those type of controversies in many different organs. And so that might be a fruitful direction for individuals. We need to be really willing. You need humility and cooperation from your colleagues and a sense of humor, like Bob Herman had, about the process, because people get pissed off. And, we need to challenge experts from around the world. So you need those people who want the greater truth. And I've tried to get epidemiologists, all of us, to have a day where we all do our modeling on one data set to prove that we don't know what we're doing, but no one will ever agree with me, too. The place to look would be the follicular carcinoma of the thyroid, the cytology. I bet you'd be interested in that. Thank you. There are two, I think, multivalent vaccines available for HPV. So are they good enough for preventing HPV into cancer? That's the vision that Doug is carrying forward, which is the work of Amy Kramer and Alan Hildesheim, which is a very large randomized trials of the Gardasil 9 and Silverbridge, if I'm allowed to say names, and then seeing do they in fact last 5 to 7 years in their protection at one dose. And that trial's ongoing now in collaboration with the Gates Foundation. My guess is from our preliminary data, yes, absolutely, we're going to find they are benefit for the kind of strategy we talked about. Not for lifelong immunity, but plenty long enough to wipe out an epidemic of HPV and to reduce it to a less common or uncommon infection.
So you think you might not need further injection, but you're safe on this 5 to 7 years?
I'm sorry, you do not need lifetime durability. You might not even need 10 to 20 year durability if you're only going about trying to crush cervical cancer. Now, we haven't talked about cancer in men, we haven't talked about a lot of other things, but for the purpose of getting rid of cervical cancer as soon as possible, I'm sure that we can do it with a campaign and about 5 to 7 years of durability.
So things what you learned from the cervical cancer, is it also true for HPV-induced oral cancer?
Oral cancer is a whole other topic, and if Samuel's here or someone else expert, I'll think of them. Different epidemiology. Learned a great deal about the differences, and it might be a different story, so I'm not saying that.
Thank you. Other questions?
I want to thank everyone for coming today. I encourage you to come over to the library. We're going to have a reception immediately after. You can say hello to all of our speakers and ask additional questions there. Thank you.